We're going to make the most incredible game in the world today. Actually, we're just going to be playing with physics for a little bit. And it's important to understand how physics works so that as you add in more complicated things like jumping and shooting and bullet drop, you understand how the basics of physics in Unity works. So we're going to be building this physics animation here. I hit play and all it does is just drop a sphere down through some obstacles, it hits the ground and then rolls away. Nothing super complicated there, but we want to make sure that it works the way that we think it's going to work so that we understand what's going on here. So without further ado, let's open up a brand new project and get started building this game right here. All right, so I've hit new on the splash screen here in Unity. I went ahead and titled it Physics Animation Steven so that I know it's my project. My username in Hackingtons is Steven, so that's why I did the Steven. And then I made sure it's saved inside of Dropbox. It's going to be a 3-dimensional game, and go ahead and create project. Do that now. All right, we have an empty game. Now we need to start adding in all the things, all of the game objects that we need in order to make this not a complete game, but a complete thought here. So the very first thing we need to do is let's go ahead and put the ground in. So let's right click, 3D object, and choose cube. Now a cube is a square, it's a 3-dimensional square, and all we really want to do with this is make it so that it's big enough to where it covers the ground. And whenever we create a new game object, we come over here to the inspector, we right click here on transform and hit reset. Just in case the editor moved it someplace that wasn't the center of the screen, we want to just reset the scale, the rotation, the position, all of that back to its default values so that we know we always start in the same spot. Now we want to change the size of this cube. So we're going to go ahead and hit the scalar tool here, the one that has the arrows that point out. And then we can start dragging these. So we have, you can see way over here, the Z is going to change when I pull on the blue one. It gets bigger and smaller in the Z direction. Okay. And then we can also grab the red one and it gets bigger and smaller in the X direction. So if we grab the green one, it gets bigger and smaller in the Y direction. We don't really want to make it taller. We just want to make it big so it covers everything. So let's go ahead, and what we could also do is in the inspector on the right hand side here, we can just enter in the values that we want. I personally know that I want this to be 50 by 1 by 50. All right, so now it's nice and big. It looks like the ground, and we can also grab the camera and kind of rotate it around here so that we are more looking from the game view. See how the camera's pointing this direction. We want to make sure that we're pointing more towards the actual direction that the camera is looking. See how it kind of it might be really hard to see, but you can see this box that it's kind of drawing these in very faint lines. That's the camera box that it's looking from. So let's go ahead and right click and middle click and rotate everything around here so that we know exactly what we're looking at. And we can zoom in and out with the scroll wheel so we can get closer to everything, farther away from everything. All right, we have our ground. It's just a white box. It's not super fancy, but we want to make sure that we know this is the ground. So we'll click on that first cube here, go way up here in the inspector, change cube to ground. Hit return, and there we go. So now this is called ground. So we know this is our ground. All right, they probably didn't need to explain why we named it ground. Let's go ahead and add in our player. That's going to be the ball that falls down. So let's go ahead and add that object in. So let's right click in the hierarchy here, 3D object, cube. No, not cube. We already have a cube. Let's delete that. Let's go. We want to make sure ground is not selected. If we right click here and do 3D object sphere, it will be a child of the ground. So we don't want that. Let's delete that. Make sure nothing is selected here. We right click and choose 3D object sphere. All right, so now we've got a sphere somewhere here. We'll see how the position is already like way messed up. That's right. Right click on transform, hit reset. All right, so now we've got it somewhere. Let's move it up. So I'm going to click on the move tool here. I'm going to grab that green one and move it up in the Y direction. Hey, now we can see it. It's not buried in the ground. Awesome. Let's rename this to be player. And then if we want to focus on it, as long as our mouse is over the scene view, we can click the F key and it will zoom in. Oops, I actually typed F in my player name. It's just called player. Okay, So if I zoom out and I'm looking someplace else and I want to find the player, hover over the scene view, hit F, and it zooms right in. And then we can zoom back out using the scroll wheel. All right, so we want our player to fall quite a way, so let's lift them way up there. All right, let's lift them a little bit higher. Okay, so now we have our player, but the player and the ground look the same. So go ahead and add in materials here to make your player a different color than your ground. And make sure you create two separate materials, a material for the player and a material for the ground. Awesome. So now your player and your ground are different colors. Mine aren't, but yours should be. Let's go ahead and before we get too far, let's save this. I'm going to call this level 1. All right. So now we have a scene here. Let's go ahead and add some objects for this player to interact with. Because if we go here and we hit play, one, player doesn't do anything. Camera can't even actually see the player because it's too high up. And two, the player doesn't fall down. So let's go ahead and let's add some objects in, and then we'll add the physics part to get the player to fall down. Maybe he's too high. Let's lower him down a bit. Okay. So we're going to go into the hierarchy, make sure that nothing is selected, right click, 3D object, cube. All right, so now we've got a cube for the ball to collide with. Now let's reset the transform so that we know it's lined up, and then we can just drag it up a little bit and maybe drag it over a little bit. F to focus on it, and we zoom out a bit. Well, I have no idea whether or not that is actually lined up with the sphere. I mean, it might kind of sort of look like it, but I want to make sure from all angles that the ball will actually hit that cube. So I can go over here where it has these colors, the Y, the X, all that. So right now I'm facing in one direction. If I hit the X here, it will actually spin the camera around and make me face in the other direction, which is pretty cool. I don't have to use the weird mouse clicks and move everything around. I can just click in the perspective here. Let's go ahead so we can see, okay, it's lined up left and right here. Let's check it from behind. That looks good, but top down, make sure the ball actually falls down on the cube, hit the Y, and we get this view here. So we can see it's a little too far to the right, so it probably won't contact that sphere. So let's just move it over. Now that they're overlapping, that's looking good, and then we can go back to our normal view like that and zoom out. And then you can play with the perspective here a little bit just so that you get a sense for it. There's a lot of trial and error here in moving the camera around. All right, so let's go ahead and hit play. Oh, wait, we never added physics materials. This does nothing. They're just floating in the sky like aliens. All right, so let's go back into our player. So we have the player selected here. We can see in the inspector, we have the player selected. And let's go ahead and go down here and add component. And what we want to add is a rigid body. It's this thing right here. Go ahead and click on that. And now you can see that it has a mass, it has drag, it has use gravity or not, which is all of the stuff that we want. And we explained kind of what the rigid body does in the skill video. I won't go over that again. But if we hit play here, we should see the ball fall, hit the cube, and fall down. All right, so we have a thing in Unity that does a thing. We have a thing that does a thing. All right, so what I want you to do is make this way more exciting. I have one player and one cube. That's not very fun. Make sure that the sphere has multiple things it can fall off of, and make sure everything's colored differently so you don't just have white on white on white. That's just awful. So make sure you create your materials and apply them and all of that. And then make sure once you're done, you have everything saved, Command S constantly. Come up here, File, Build. Actually, build settings. That way you can choose the exact platform. We want WebGL, and then go ahead and hit build. This will create your folder for you that you can drag into BitBalloon just like we did in the skill video. All right, so hopefully you have something that works and understand that the rigid body is the physics of the game. So the rigid body itself adds in the physics. And then also understand that if you have 10,000 objects on here, you have 4,000 cubes and they're all moving in different things, it's going to get a little complicated. But don't be scared just to break the game. You can always undo what you did. Add rigid bodies onto this cube here. Add tons of cubes. Add some that have rigid bodies and some that don't. So some obey the laws of physics and some don't. Just go crazy with it. I want to see some interesting projects in here because you can do so many different things here. I just showed you the basics. Build something really good. All right, I'm done rambling. Go build something amazing.